We have 4 files we're going to examine in this lecture. That's the global, app settings, launch settings, and project.json file. So as you can see in your Solution Explorer, this is your project structure associated with your ASP.NET Core application. The first file you have right here is the global.json file that's associated with the SDK version of ASP.NET Core and also the projects associated to your .NET Core project. You have the source associated with the project tag of your JSON file, and this is where your project resides right here. So when you implement your CLI commands, it's going to be associated with your source file inside of this project. And we have different versions of ASP.NET Core. This is the preview version I'm on right now, 1.0.0 preview 2. This is the information that your global.json file holds inside of your project. We also have an Appsettings.Json. Now this doesn't come default with an empty application, but typically in your Appsettings.Json you will associate connection strings to your database, which we will demonstrate in later lectures. We also have information associated with the application insights like the instrumentation key, and also logging by default associating the system information, Microsoft, and the logging level that we want to associate with our project. So all of the configuration is associated in JSON files. In comparison to full .NET Framework applications, we are not dealing with that XML anymore. We're dealing with JSON files to associate with key values inside of these files. So your Appsettings.Json will typically associate configuration settings to database connections or key values that you want to associate there. Now we also have a launch settings.json file that we associate in Visual Studio, and this is the settings associated with our IIS settings. What application URL we're going to associate? Is it going to be associated with an SSL port? We have IIS Express to associate with a launch. We also have a tag associated with .NET Core, which is the command name project, and has a launch URL associated with localhost 5000. When you're running this on Mac OS X or Linux, you're going to associate with the .NET CLI and run the launch URL associated with your launch settings.json file. So right here, this is the different profile settings for launching your application. And as you can see, the final aspect of this is the project.json file. The project.json file has all of the different dependencies associated with your NuGet packages right here. And as you can see right here, we're a .NET Core App 1.0 platform. And this is all of our NuGet packages associated with our server-side dependencies. We have the application insights ASP.NET Core. We have dependencies associated with IIS, Kestrel, static files, configuration for JSON, configuration for logging. And like I stated before, it's very nice to have this because I could easily come in here and take away one of the dependencies. And watch this. You'll see it restore the packages associated with the dependencies right there. So it's rebuilding all of our references associated with our .NET Core app. And then look at the references when I add this back. You'll see the environmental variables dependency installed back right here. We also have different tooling associated with dependency libraries, the ASP.NET Core Razor tools associated with the type build. We also have tools associated with the bundle minifier core, Razor tools, and IIS integration. And then we also have the framework versions of support like .NET Core App 1.0, the imports of the .NET 5.6. We also have build options associated with the emit entry point and conserving compilation context. And we also have the runtime option configuration for the associated with garbage collection and what we want to set that property to be. And also our publishing options are configured here in the project.json associated with the www root, the views folder, which has our CS/HTML files associated with MVC, also different views associated in different file folders. We can associate that to include in our publishing settings, our Appsettings.Json, which associates configuration settings, and a web.config if we're going to configure this for IIS. So if we're going to implement our application on IIS, by default, The scaffolding application has a web.config, and in Visual Studio, it will associate a web.config. But if you're associating your application on Mac OS X or Linux, you don't need your web.config. We also have pre-publishing associated with Bower and the .NET Bundle, which is the library we'll utilize in future lectures. I'll also demonstrate Gulp as a task manager for bundling and minifying CSS and JavaScript. We also have a post-publish tab associating with publishing to IIS, the path, and the framework version. And one other thing we want to look at here is how does this look on disk? So we're going to open our solution in File Explorer. And you'll see right here we have our .NET Core solution. We have the Global.Json. We have our source file. And this is where our application will build from right here when we implement the .NET Core CLI. So this is all of our settings here. And then we have a Visual Studio file associated with Visual Studio project. We have the application host.config, which is an XML configuration. And then we also have our solution tied to the project. It's a little bit different when you scaffold it utilizing Yeoman and implementing it on Visual Studio Code. So there is a little bit different comparison to the project structure because there'll be no solution. But this is how we set it up in Visual Studio, and this is the folder structure associated with our project. In the next lecture, we will start examining some of the client-side references and dependencies we have in our project. We'll also look at just how we can reference client-side dependencies in our project.